The application sat on Hallman's desk like a bad joke. 17 instructors had tried teaching at the Intergalactic Academy for apex species. 17 had failed. 3 were still recovering in medical facilities. 2 had simply disappeared, though security footage showed them running toward the escape pods during their first-class session. The rest had submitted resignation letters that all said basically the same thing: teaching monsters was impossible. Hallman's 4 arms shuffled through the paperwork again, searching for something he must have missed. The Academy existed because the Galactic Council believed even the most dangerous predatory species deserved education. Noble idea, terrible execution. You couldn't teach a Dravik hunter to sit still any more than you could teach a star to stop burning. Their biology demanded movement, stalking, the thrill of pursuit. The Ulani swarm fragments became agitated without constant stimulation, their collective consciousness fracturing into aggressive splinters. Kryn Voidstalkers saw darkness as opportunity and other beings as either threats or prey. Torvik Siegebreakers possessed strength that made structural supports look fragile. The door chimed. Hallman pressed the entry panel with his lower left hand while the other 3 organized files. A human walked in. Hallman had seen humans before. They were spreading across the galaxy lately, popping up in unexpected places. This one looked ordinary, average height for their species, dark hair going gray at the temples, worn jacket with too many pockets, boots that had seen actual use. He carried a single bag over his shoulder. "Dr. Roy Bennett?" Hallman asked. "Just Roy is fine." The human sat down without being invited, which was either confidence or ignorance. "I'm here about the teaching position." Hallman appreciated directness. He pulled up the human's file on his display screen. "Your credentials are interesting. Xenobiology degree from Earth University. Wilderness guide for 15 years. Teaching certificate. 5 years working with what you call troubled youth." He looked up. "Why do you want this job?" Roy leaned back in the chair. "Because nobody else does." "That's not a reason. That's an observation." "Fair enough." Roy glanced at the window behind Hallman where the Academy's main structure loomed against the stars. "I read about this place. You're trying to prove that biology isn't destiny, that creatures born to hunt can learn to coexist, that predators can become more than their instincts." He met Hallman's eyes. "I've spent my whole life believing that. Seems worth trying to help." Hallman appreciated the honesty, but doubted the human understood what he was asking for. "Let me be clear about what you would face. Dravik hunters stand 12 feet tall, and their pack dynamics involve establishing dominance through combat. Ulani fragments communicate through pheromones you cannot smell and make decisions you cannot predict. Kryn stalkers can move through shadows in ways our scientists still don't understand. Torvik are strong enough to bend steel with their bare hands." He paused. The previous instructor lasted 4 days before a Dravik student pinned him against the wall. The one before that made it 6 hours before a Ulani swarm surrounded her, and she had a panic attack. "Are you prepared for that?" "Probably not," Roy said, "but I'd like to try anyway." The answer surprised Hallman. Most applicants either pretended they weren't afraid or tried to convince him of their expertise. This human admitted vulnerability while maintaining resolve. Unusual combination. "I should tell you that we cannot guarantee your safety. The classroom is reinforced. Security monitors everything. Medical staff stand ready. But if a student decides to attack, response time is measured in seconds. Several seconds where you would be alone with them." Roy nodded slowly. "What do the students actually want? I mean, they're here by choice, right? Or are they forced to attend?" "Their governments send them. Most apex species recognize that their youth needs socialization training before entering galactic society. But wanting to learn and being able to learn are different things. These students have never encountered beings who weren't either predators like themselves or prey. They don't understand cooperation beyond pack dynamics. They've never had to consider another creature's perspective." "Sounds like they're scared," Roy said quietly. Hallman's upper arms crossed while his lower arms gestured dismissively. They're apex predators. They don't experience fear the way you do. Everyone experiences fear. They just show it differently. Roy stood up and walked to the window. When I guided groups through wilderness areas on Earth, I worked with actual predators sometimes. Bears, big cats, wolves. People think those animals are just killers, but they're cautious. They assess threats. They make decisions based on risk versus reward. They get scared when something unfamiliar happens. He turned back to Hallman. I'm guessing your students feel the same way. This whole place is unfamiliar. They're surrounded by species they don't understand. They're being asked to behave in ways that contradict their instincts. That's terrifying. Hallman considered this. The previous instructors had focused on control, establishing authority, creating consequences for aggression. None of it had worked. Maybe approaching from a different angle made sense. Maybe it was just another failure waiting to happen. When can you start? Hallman asked. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, then. I'll have quarters prepared and send you the classroom access codes. Hallman stood and extended his upper right hand. Roy shook it with surprising firmness. One more thing. If you feel unsafe at any moment, leave. Don't try to be heroic. Don't assume you can handle something you can't. Just leave. Understood? Understood. Roy left the office. Hallman watched him go, then opened a new file on his system. He titled it Instructor 18 and began documenting the hearing. He gave it 3 days, maybe 4 if the human got lucky. Then he would be writing another incident report and posting another job opening. The next morning, Roy stood outside classroom 7. The door was reinforced durasteel, scarred with claw marks. He could hear movement inside. Heavy footsteps, chittering sounds, something scraping against metal. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every survival instinct he possessed screamed at him to walk away. He opened the door and stepped inside. The room was massive, 30 meters across, high ceiling, furniture built for beings much larger than humans. 4 students waited. A Dravik crouched near the back wall, scales gleaming like polished obsidian. A cluster of Ulani fragments moved in synchronized patterns near the left side. A Kryn girl stood in the corner where shadows pooled deepest. A Torvik sat in the center, so large his shoulders were level with Roy's head even while sitting. They all turned to look at him. Roy walked to the middle of the room. He set his bag down. Then he sat on the floor, crossed his legs, and waited. The Dravik moved first, rising to his full height, 12 feet of muscle and fang. He approached slowly, each step deliberate. Roy could smell something sharp and chemical, probably pheromones related to aggression or dominance. The Dravik stopped 3 feet away and stared down at him. "Aren't you going to run?" the Dravik asked. His voice was surprisingly clear despite the fangs. "No," Roy said. "Aren't you going to tell us the rules?" "Not yet." The Dravik tilted his head, confused. The Ulani fragments moved closer, forming a semicircle. The Kryn girl stepped out of her shadow just enough to see better. The Torvik leaned forward. "Then what are you doing?" the Dravik asked. Roy looked up at him and smiled slightly. "Waiting to hear what you want to learn." The question hung in the air like something physical. Rask had never been asked what he wanted to learn. Dravik education involved combat training, pack hierarchy lessons, and hunting simulations. Instructors told you what you needed to know. They didn't ask. He circled the human slowly, claws clicking against the floor. The small creature didn't move, didn't flinch, just sat there with that strange, calm expression. Rask had seen prey freeze before, paralyzed by fear. This felt different. The human was choosing to stay still. "You should be afraid," Rask said. "I am afraid," the human replied, "but I still want to know what you want to learn." The honesty confused Rask more than anything else could have. He sat down, though his posture remained ready to spring. "I want to know why other species work together. My pack has hierarchy. We have roles, but we don't cooperate with outsiders. When I watch the station..." I see different species helping each other. It makes no sense. The human nodded like this was a reasonable thing to wonder about. That's a good question. What's your name? Rask. I'm Roy. The human turned to the Ulani cluster. What about you? The fragments buzzed and clicked, conferring with themselves. Finally, one stepped forward slightly. We are Cluster 9. We want to know how solitary beings make decisions. We think collectively. Each fragment contributes, but species like you decide alone. How do you not go mad from the isolation? Roy considered this. I imagine it feels as strange to me being alone as it would feel to you being many. Maybe we can explore that together. The Kryn girl moved closer, though she kept to the darker areas of the room. Her form was difficult to focus on, like she existed slightly out of phase with regular space. I'm Shade. Why do some species trust strangers? In the dark, everyone is potential threat or potential prey. Trust seems like suicide. Trust is risky, Roy agreed. But so is never trusting anyone. We can talk about that. The Torvek rumbled, his voice so deep it vibrated through the floor. I am Granite. Why don't weak species simply surrender to strong ones? It would save everyone time and resources. Yet I see small species arguing with large ones. Fragile species negotiating with armored ones. Efficiency demands submission to superior force. Roy stood up slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. These are all excellent questions. Want to know something interesting? I have questions too. I want to know what it's like to think as part of a collective. I want to understand how you perceive shadows. I'm curious about pack dynamics and what strength means in your culture. He looked at each of them in turn. So here's what I propose. We teach each other. You tell me about your species. I tell you about others I've studied and met. We figure this out together. Rask's tail lashed once. Previous instructors told us to control ourselves, to suppress our instincts, to behave like prey species. I'm not asking you to suppress anything, Roy said. I'm asking you to understand why your instincts affect others and why their reactions aren't weaknesses, just different survival strategies. Cluster 9 buzzed louder. You're saying there are multiple valid approaches to survival. I'm saying the galaxy is big enough for lots of different approaches. The trick is learning to exist alongside each other without destroying everything. Granite shifted his massive bulk. What if our nature makes us incompatible with other species? Roy walked over to his bag and pulled out a data pad. Let me tell you about Earth, my home planet. Humans evolved as persistence hunters. We're not the strongest or fastest. We don't have claws or venom or armor, but we can track prey for days until it collapses from exhaustion. We can throw things with deadly accuracy. We can organize complex group hunts. He paused. We're predators, and for most of our history, we were really good at killing each other. Tribes, nations, religions, different ways of thinking. We found endless reasons for violence. Shade's voice came from the shadows. What changed? We learned that cooperation gave us things violence couldn't. Safety, progress, art, science. It wasn't easy. We still struggle with it. But we figured out that being predators didn't mean we had to be only predators. Rask leaned forward. How? Stories mostly. We started telling stories about each other, trying to understand different perspectives. Once you understand someone, it's harder to see them as just prey or enemy. Roy activated his data pad and projected images into the air. Humans of different varieties, different cultures, different time periods. These are all my species. We look similar, but we developed wildly different beliefs and customs. Learning to see each other as equally human took thousands of years. We're still learning. The students watched the images cycle through. Roy added other species, Hallman's people, gentle herbivore races, aquatic civilizations, silicon-based life forms, hive minds and singular consciousnesses. The galaxy has room for all of this, Roy said quietly, but only if we try to understand instead of just react. They spent the rest of that first session talking. Roy asked them about their home worlds, what they ate, how they communicated, what scared them, What made them happy if happiness was something they experienced? The students were hesitant at first, but curiosity won over caution. Rask described the thrill of a successful hunt, the way his pack moved as one organism. Cluster 9 explained how thoughts flowed between fragments, creating ideas no single piece could generate alone. Shade talked about the comfort of darkness, how light felt aggressive and exposing. Granite spoke of the satisfaction when his strength protected his herd clan, how being strong meant having responsibility. Roy listened to everything. He didn't correct or judge. He asked follow-up questions. He compared their experiences to things he knew. When Rask described pack loyalty, Roy talked about human families. When Cluster 9 discussed collective decision-making, Roy mentioned democratic governments. When Shade explained territorial instincts, Roy brought up property rights and personal space. The session ended when the automated chime signaled class time was over. The students looked surprised. Time had passed without violence or conflict or anyone getting hurt. "Same time tomorrow?" Roy asked. They all agreed. As they left, Rask paused at the door. "Why aren't you like the other instructors?" Roy smiled. "Because I don't think you need to be controlled. I think you need to be understood. There's a difference." After they were gone, Roy sat back down on the floor. His hands were shaking. The adrenaline that had kept him calm during class now flooded his system. He'd been terrified the entire time, but it had worked. They'd talked. They'd listened. They'd been curious. He pulled out his personal log and made a note. Day 1 successful. Students engaged. No injuries. They asked real questions and gave real answers. Tomorrow we start exploring those questions. In his office, Hallman reviewed the security footage with disbelief. The human had sat among apex predators and held a conversation. No dominance displays. No threats. No incidents. Just talking. It made no sense according to every educational theory Hallman knew. He updated his file, Instructor 18 showing unexpected promise. Recommendation, continue observation. Maybe this human would last a week after all. 3 weeks into the semester, Roy decided field trips would help more than lectures. The students knew theory. They needed practice. "We're going to the commissary," he announced one morning. Rask's scales rippled with confusion. "The feeding area, why?" "Because you need to see how different species interact during vulnerable moments. Eating is vulnerable. You're distracted. You're focused on food. Yet hundreds of species eat together in that space every day without conflict." Granite's rumble was skeptical. "They're probably too weak to fight." "Let's find out," Roy said. The walk through the station corridors was an education itself. Other beings saw the students and reacted. Some pressed against walls. Some hurried past. Some changed direction entirely. Roy watched his students notice these reactions. Rask's tail drooped. Cluster 9's fragments pulled closer together. Shade retreated further into herself. Granite's shoulders hunched forward, making himself smaller. "They fear us," Cluster 9 observed. "Yes," Roy said. "How does that feel?" The question surprised them. Rask spoke first. "Bad, we're not hunting, we're just walking." "Remember that feeling," Roy said. "Remember that your presence alone creates fear. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because of what others think you might do." The commissary was enormous. Hundreds of tables accommodated dozens of species. The air smelled like 1,000 different meals, some pleasant, some definitely not. When Roy's group entered, nearby conversation stopped. Beings stared. Roy guided them to a table in the middle of the space. Maximum visibility. He sat down. His students hesitated, then joined him. "Now watch," Roy said. "Don't stare aggressively, just observe." Slowly, cautiously, other beings returned to their meals. Roy pointed out a table where 3 different species shared food. "Those are Finnish traders, the tall ones. They're sharing with Quillen engineers and what looks like a Darthan artist. Different biology, different cultures, but they're eating together." Shade leaned forward slightly. The Quillen keep glancing at exits. Good observation. Why do you think that is? Prey instinct. Always no escape routes. Right. But they're still here, still sharing a meal. That's trust even if it comes with caution. A station worker approached their table. Small species barely reached Roy's waist. 4 legs, compound eyes, holding a data pad. She was visibly nervous but determined. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice had a musical quality. "I'm supposed to check if you need any accommodations. Different species have different dietary requirements." Roy smiled at her. "That's very thoughtful. My students haven't eaten yet. Can you explain what options are available?" The worker's antennae twitched. She looked at the students, then back at Roy. "The commissary offers protein synthesis for carnivorous species, vegetation options for herbivores, mineral supplements for silicon-based beings, energy absorption stations for photosynthetic species, chemical baths for those who consume through immersion." Granite shifted his weight. The worker flinched but held her ground. "We appreciate your help," Roy said. "This is Granite. He's trying to learn about species interaction. Would you mind telling him what species you are and what you do on the station?" The worker's eyes went wide. She looked like she might run. Then something changed in her posture. Decision made. "I'm Pip. I'm Corelli. We're maintenance specialists. I fix environmental systems." Granite stared at her for a long moment. "Your species is small." "Yes. How do you survive?" Pip's antennae straightened. "We're good at fixing things. When systems break, people need us. Being small means we can access spaces others can't. Our compound eyes see electrical fields. We notice problems before they become disasters." "So you survive through usefulness," Granite said slowly. "We survive through cooperation. We fix systems. Others protect us from threats. Everyone benefits." Roy watched this exchange carefully. Granite was processing new information. The idea that survival didn't require being the strongest was foreign to Torvek culture. "Thank you, Pip," Roy said. "You've been very helpful." Pip nodded and hurried away. But she glanced back once, and her expression held less fear than before. Over the next hour, Roy's students observed dozens of interactions. They saw conflict resolution when 2 species argued over a table. They watched a medical emergency when someone had an allergic reaction, and 3 different species helped immediately. They noticed patterns of respect and courtesy that had nothing to do with strength. On the walk back to class, Cluster 9 buzzed thoughtfully. "The station functions because everyone has a role, not a hierarchy of strong versus weak, a network of different capabilities." "Yes," Roy said, "that's exactly it." Back in the classroom, they discussed what they'd seen. Roy asked them to identify moments when they'd assumed something based on size or appearance and been wrong. Rask admitted he'd thought the Finnish traders were weak until he learned they controlled most of the station's supply contracts. Economic power was strength he hadn't considered. Shade confessed she'd been surprised when a large armored species deferred to a small aquatic being. Roy explained the aquatic creature was the station's chief engineer. Expertise commanded respect. Granite had been most affected by meeting Pip. "I always thought strength meant dominance, but she was strong in a different way. She wasn't afraid to speak to me, even though I could crush her without effort. That took courage." "Strength has many forms," Roy said. "Physical power is just one. There's strength in knowledge, strength in kindness, strength in standing your ground even when you're scared." The next day, something unexpected happened. Granite accidentally knocked over a structural support while practicing movement exercises in the gym. The support crashed into a civilian worker, an elderly Quillen engineer named Fetch. The injury wasn't critical but required medical attention. Security arrived immediately. The worker's supervisor demanded Granite be expelled and sent back to his home world. Standard protocol for apex species injuring civilians was immediate removal from the program. Roy intervened before Hallman could process the paperwork. "Wait," Roy said, standing in the director's office. "Give us another option." "There is no other option. An Apex student harmed a civilian. Regulations are clear." Regulations were written assuming Apex students can't learn accountability. But what if they can? What if this is a teaching moment instead of a failure? Hallman's four arms crossed in varying expressions of skepticism. "What do you propose?" "Let Granite work with Fetch. Let him understand the consequences of his actions, not through punishment but through restoration." The idea was so unusual that Hallman had to consult council records. There was no precedent, which meant there was no regulation against it either. Fetch was skeptical when Roy explained the plan. "You want me to work with the being who injured me. I want him to understand what he did from your perspective, and I want you to see that he's capable of more than destruction." Fetch agreed, mostly because the alternative was dealing with bureaucratic replacement proceedings for weeks. Granite spent the next 10 days working alongside Fetch. He learned about Quillen physiology and how the injury would affect Fetch's mobility for months. He learned about the engineering work Fetch did and why it mattered to the station. He learned that Fetch had 3 children and that missing work meant financial stress. At the end of 10 days, Granite asked Roy for help writing something in standard Galactic. Roy helped him compose a formal apology, not a required statement, a genuine expression of understanding and regret. When Granite presented it to Fetch, the old engineer's compound eyes glistened. "I've never received an apology from an Apex species before. Thank you." Granite returned to class different, quieter, more careful with his movements, more aware of the space he occupied and how it affected others. Rask noticed the change. "What happened to you?" "I learned that strength without awareness is just danger," Granite said. "And that saying sorry doesn't make you weak, it makes you responsible." The lesson spread through the entire class. They'd all watched what happened. They'd all seen Granite grow from the experience. That night Shade approached Roy after class. "Aren't you afraid of us?" she asked. The same question from weeks ago, but with different weight now. Roy answered honestly. "Every day. But fear doesn't mean I can't also respect you, teach you, or care about what happens to you. Fear and caring can exist together." Shade absorbed this. "Previous instructors saw us as problems to solve. You see us as students to understand." "Because that's what you are," Roy said simply. The transformation was visible now, slow but real. These students were becoming something their species had never produced before, apex predators who chose cooperation over conquest. The inspection team arrived without warning, which was the entire point. Official evaluation required seeing the program as it actually functioned, not as it could be staged. Hallman met them at the docking bay. 3 inspectors. Lead inspector was a being named Quill, from a species that valued academic achievement above all else. His people had 17 different degrees before considering themselves educated. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered a problem he couldn't analyze. "Director Hallman," Quill said, his voice sharp. "We've received concerning reports about your program. A human instructor with questionable credentials teaching apex predators through unconventional methods. The council wants verification that standards are being maintained." "Of course," Hallman said. He'd learned to navigate bureaucracy through years of practice. "Would you like to observe a class session?" "We'll observe several, but first, we're implementing a practical examination. The students will face a scenario designed to test their true progress, not rehearsed responses, actual instinctive reactions." Hallman felt his stomach drop. "What kind of scenario?" "One that will reveal whether they've genuinely internalized cooperative values or merely learned to perform cooperation when supervised." They informed Roy during lunch. He listened to the plan with growing concern. You're going to create a crisis situation with vulnerable-appearing species and see if my students revert to predatory behavior. Precisely, Quill said. It's the only way to measure genuine change versus surface compliance. And you're not going to tell them it's a test. Obviously not. That would defeat the purpose. Roy looked at Hallman. The director's expression was apologetic but resigned. Council inspectors had authority he couldn't challenge. When, Roy asked. Tomorrow morning. We've already prepared the scenario. Your students will believe there's an emergency in the residential sector. Various species will appear to be in danger. We'll monitor their responses. Roy spent that evening in his quarters, unable to sleep. He believed in his students. He'd seen them grow, but growth under controlled conditions was different from instinct under pressure. When actual chaos erupted, would weeks of learning hold against millions of years of evolution? The next morning felt too normal. His students arrived for class as usual. Rask was discussing a documentary he'd watched about pack dynamics in social prey species. Cluster 9 had been studying old Earth history and wanted to talk about democracy. Shade had questions about art and whether beauty was universal. Granite had been reading philosophy texts about moral responsibility. Then the alarms went off. Emergency lights flashed. The station's voice system announced a containment breach in Residential Section 4. All personnel were ordered to evacuate toward the docking bays. Roy's students immediately went alert. Every predatory instinct activated. Rask's scales flattened against his body. Cluster 9's fragments spread into defensive formation. Shade disappeared into the nearest shadow. Granite rose to his full height, ready for threat response. "What do we do?" Rask asked Roy. Before Roy could answer, Quill's voice came through the classroom speakers. "Instructor Bennett, please remain in the classroom. Your students should proceed to the residential sector to assist with evacuation." Roy met each student's eyes. "Remember what we've talked about. Remember what you've learned." They left at a run. The residential sector was chaos. Beings running in different directions, smoke from a staged fire, sparking electrical panels, and scattered throughout various species who appeared injured or trapped. The inspectors watched from a secure observation room. Quill had his recording devices ready. "Now we'll see the truth," he said. Rask reached the sector first, his speed advantage showing. He saw a family of small beings trapped behind a collapsed barrier. In his home pack, injured prey meant an easy meal. His predatory brain registered vulnerability, weakness, opportunity. He started moving the barrier. Carefully, slowly, making sure the structure wouldn't collapse further. When he'd created an opening, he called out in standard Galactic, "Can you move? Is anyone injured?" The family stared at him in terror. A Dravik hunter asking about injuries instead of causing them violated their understanding of how the universe worked. "It's okay," Rask said, trying to make his voice gentle despite the fangs. "I'm a student here. I'm trying to help. Can you walk?" Behind him, Cluster 9 arrived. The fragments immediately spread out, assessing the situation. One group moved to stabilize electrical systems. Another began organizing the panicked civilians into efficient evacuation routes. A third group checked structural integrity of nearby walls. Shade emerged from the smoke, her ability to move through darkness making her perfect for search and rescue. She found 3 beings trapped in a dark corner, too scared to move. She spoke softly from the shadows, telling them she knew the way out, that she could guide them to safety if they trusted her. Granite was last to arrive but made the biggest impact. He positioned himself near a section of ceiling that looked ready to collapse. Civilians ran beneath him while he held tons of material above his head, arms shaking with effort. He didn't move until everyone was clear. In the observation room, Quill's mandibles hung open in shock. They're cooperating, actual cooperation, not pack dynamics, not hive behavior. individual choice to help beings they could easily overpower. Another inspector was frantically taking notes. The third was already composing a report. Roy arrived at the sector just as his students were finishing evacuation. He saw Rask guiding the last civilians toward safety, Cluster 9 coordinating with station security, Shade emerging from darkness with two more rescued beings, Granite carefully lowering the ceiling section he'd been supporting, making sure it fell harmlessly. They all looked exhausted, but they also looked proud. The emergency lights switched off. Regular lighting returned. Quill's voice announced through speakers that the exercise was complete. Roy's students looked at each other, then at the civilians they'd just rescued. Understanding dawned. It had been a test. Every vulnerable being, every dangerous situation, all carefully staged. Rask approached one of the families he'd helped. "Did we scare you?" The small being nodded honestly. "Yes, but you also saved us. Even though it wasn't real, you treated it like it was." "Because beings needing help should be helped," Rask said. "That's what we learned." The inspection team met with Hallman and Roy afterward. Quill's entire demeanor had changed. "I've evaluated hundreds of educational programs across the galaxy. I've never seen results like this. Your students didn't just pass the test. They exceeded every benchmark we have for cooperative behavior." "What changed them?" another inspector asked Roy. Roy thought about how to answer. "I didn't change them. I helped them understand why what they are matters to everyone else. They're still predators, still apex species, but now they know there are more ways to be strong than just through dominance." Quill began composing his official report. "The Council will want to expand this program. Other stations, more students. Can you train additional instructors?" "I can try," Roy said. That evening, after the inspectors left, Roy gathered his students. "You did something remarkable today. You chose to help when your instincts probably told you to do something else. That's real growth." Granite's voice rumbled thoughtfully. "It felt good. Using strength to protect instead of dominate. I liked it." Cluster 9 buzzed in agreement. Collective problem-solving works better when the collective includes different types of minds. We were more effective with diverse approaches. Shade spoke from her comfortable shadow corner. "People were still afraid of us, but they were also grateful, better than just afraid." Rask's tail swished slowly. "I have a question, though. What happens when we leave here, when we go back to our worlds where nobody thinks like this?" The question hung heavy in the air. Roy had been dreading this moment. The semester was ending soon. These students would return to societies that didn't value cooperation the way they'd learned to. What happened to growth in hostile soil? "That's what we need to talk about next," Roy said quietly. "How to maintain what you've learned when everything around you pushes against it." The graduation ceremony was scheduled for the last day of the semester. But before that, Roy had private conversations with each student. They'd requested these meetings, which told him how much they'd changed. At the beginning, they wouldn't have asked for help. Rask came first. The Dravik hunter sat across from Roy, his massive frame somehow looking smaller than usual. "My pack won't understand what I learned here. They'll think cooperation with other species makes me weak. In Dravik culture, you either dominate or submit. There's no middle ground." Roy had expected this. "What do you want to do?" "I don't want to lose this, the way I think now, the understanding I have." Rask's claws tapped nervously against the floor. "But I also can't abandon my pack, their family." "Then you become a bridge," Roy said. "You show them that cooperation doesn't mean submission. It means choosing when to use strength and when to use wisdom. Can you think of situations where cooperation would benefit your pack?" Rask considered. "Hunting is becoming harder on our world. Prey animals are adapting, getting smarter. Maybe if different packs worked together instead of competing, we'd be more successful." "There's your starting point. Show them practical benefits. Don't try to change everything at once. Small steps." Cluster 9 arrived next. The fragments were agitated, moving in anxious patterns. Our hive expects us to return and reintegrate completely, to share all memories and dissolve back into the collective. But we've become more individual here. We have thoughts that are just ours. The hive might reject us. Roy leaned forward. What do you want? We want to stay connected to the hive, but also maintain individual identity. Is that possible? I don't know Uleni biology well enough to answer that, but I know humans have similar struggles between individual needs and group belonging. We created systems that honor both. Families where people can be themselves but still belong. Communities that value individual contribution. Maybe your hive could benefit from fragments who have experienced different perspectives. You're saying we could teach the hive what we learned, like you taught us. Exactly. Be the fragments who show there's value in individual experience while maintaining collective bonds. Shade's meeting was shortest. She appeared from the corner shadows and spoke quietly. I don't want to go back to the dark. My species lives in isolation. We only interact when necessary. But I've learned that light isn't an enemy, that other beings can be companions instead of threats. Going back to solitude feels like going backward. Then don't go back to how things were, Roy said. Your people need someone who can interact with other species. Trade negotiators, diplomats, representatives. You could be the first Kryn to build bridges instead of walls. My people will think I'm strange. Probably being different is hard, but someone has to be first, otherwise nothing ever changes. Shade considered this from her shadow. You were first human to teach apex predators successfully. That must have been hard. Terrifying, Roy admitted, but worth it. Granite's meeting lasted longest. The Torvik sat heavily, his armored bulk making the reinforced furniture creak. I understand accountability now. I understand that strength means responsibility, but my people value strength above all else. The strongest lead, the strong protect, the strong decide. How do I tell them that being strong also means being careful, that power requires restraint? Roy thought about this. Does your species have stories, legends about great leaders? Many. Our history is full of mighty warriors who defended our territories. Were any of those warriors known for wisdom, for knowing when not to fight? Granite's expression shifted as he accessed memories. Yes, breaker of storms. He was the most powerful Torvik in generations, but his greatest achievement wasn't a battle. He prevented a war by negotiating with a neighboring species. Other Torvik called him weak, until the neighboring species became our greatest trade partners. His wisdom brought more prosperity than any conquest could have. So you have precedent. Your people already know that strength and wisdom work together. You just need to remind them. The graduation ceremony itself was small. Just Roy's 4 students, Hallman, and a few station officials. But families had been invited. That's where the real test began. Rask's pack arrived first. 8 Dravik hunters, all huge and intimidating. They watched their young relative with suspicious eyes. Rask had sent messages about what he'd learned, but seeing him interact calmly with other species clearly disturbed them. Cluster 9's hive sent a representative, a large collection of fragments that dwarfed the student cluster. They buzzed and clicked in complex patterns, communicating things Roy couldn't understand. But he saw Cluster 9 responding with equal complexity, defending choices, explaining experiences. Shade's family appeared literally from nowhere, stepping out of shadows that shouldn't have existed. They observed silently, their forms hard to focus on. Roy noticed they kept distance from light sources. Granite's herd clan sent 3 elders, massive Torvik who made even Granite look small. Their armor was scarred from centuries of life. They studied their descendant with hard eyes. Hallman gave a brief speech about the program's success. Then Roy was asked to say something. These students came here as apex predators, he said simply. They're leaving as apex predators who understand cooperation, They haven't been weakened. They've been given more tools, more options, more ways to interact with the galaxy. What they do with that knowledge is up to them. Then came the demonstration, the final test, not for the inspectors this time, but for the families. Roy had designed a complex scenario, multiple problems requiring coordination between different species. His students worked together, using everything they'd learned. Rask's pack tactics combined with Cluster Nine's distributed thinking. Shade's stealth abilities supported by Granite's strength. All coordinated, all effective, all choosing to cooperate. The families watched in silence. When it ended, Granite's eldest clan member approached him. "You've learned strange things, young one, disturbing things." "Yes, Elder," Granite said respectfully. "You've also learned useful things, things that could benefit our people. Tell me more about this restorative justice concept." Around the room, similar conversations began. Rask's pack leader admitted that cooperation between packs might solve current hunting challenges. Cluster Nine's hive representative acknowledged that individual experience could enrich collective understanding. Shade's family remained skeptical, but agreed to consider a diplomatic role for their changed descendant. Roy watched these conversations with hope tempered by realism. Some families would reject what their young ones had learned. Some students would struggle to maintain growth in hostile environments, but some would succeed. Some would become bridges between old ways and new possibilities. After the families left, Roy gave each student a final assignment, written on simple cards. Teach one person from your species what you learned here, just one. If they learn, they can teach another. That's how change spreads, not through revolution but through patient, persistent education. Rask accepted his card. "One person, I can do that." "We can teach our hive mates," Cluster 9 said. Shade held her card carefully. "I'll find someone willing to listen." Granite rumbled his agreement. "One person at a time, like you taught us." The goodbyes were harder than Roy expected. He'd spent months with these students, watched them struggle and grow. He'd been terrified of them initially. Now he was proud of them. Shade approached him last, stepping close enough that he could see her clearly. She handed him something small and dark. "In my culture, we keep tokens from important moments. This is from my first shadow walk. I want you to have it." Roy accepted the gift, understanding its significance. Kryn never shared personal items. "Thank you, I'll keep it safe." "You taught monsters," Shade said quietly. "But we were never really monsters, just misunderstood predators. Thank you for understanding us." They left one by one, Rask with his pack, Cluster 9 merging briefly with their hive representative, Shade disappearing into shadows, Granite following his clan elders. Roy stood in the empty classroom afterward, alone with his thoughts and memories. The room looked different now, less like a cage and more like a space where impossible things had happened. 6 months passed like water through open hands. Roy trained 3 new instructors using methods he developed with his first class. The academy expanded, adding 2 more classrooms and doubling student capacity. Hallman's bureaucratic anxiety transformed into cautious optimism as success rates climbed. But Roy wondered about his original students constantly. Had they maintained what they'd learned? Had hostile home environments crushed new growth? Were they still trying, or had they given up? The first message arrived on a random Tuesday. Rask's face appeared on Roy's communication screen, scales gleaming with health. "Instructor Roy," Rask said formally, then grinned in a way that showed too many teeth. "I taught my pack leader about cooperative hunting. He was skeptical. Then we tried it. 3 packs working together took down prey that would have been impossible alone. We formed the first interpack alliance in Dravik history. Other packs are watching. Some are interested. Change is slow, but it's happening." The second message came a week later. Cluster 9's fragments appeared fragmented on screen, speaking in turn. "We returned to the hive expecting rejection. Instead, we found curiosity. The collective wanted to understand our individual experiences. We've established a new protocol. Fragments can separate for learning periods, then return and share. We're calling it perspective enrichment. Other hives are studying our model. We changed our entire species approach to individual versus collective consciousness. It started with your question about how solitary beings think. Shade's message was audio only, her form too difficult to record properly. I opened an embassy. First Kryn diplomatic station in galactic history. It's small. Just me and 2 assistants. But we're facilitating trade agreements between my people and 3 other species. My family still thinks I'm strange, but they also benefit from the resources these agreements provide. Strangeness becomes acceptable when it's profitable. I'm teaching 2 young Kryn everything you taught me. They'll carry it forward. Granite's message showed him standing in what looked like a disaster response center. I joined the Galactic Emergency Response Network. When stations have crises, when colonies face disasters, they call us. I use my strength to rescue beings who can't rescue themselves. Last month, I saved 40 lives during a station decompression. My clan is confused but proud. Strong protector is still strong, they say, just protecting different things now. I'm training 5 other Torvik in crisis response. We're showing our people that strength serves best when it serves others. Each message mentioned teaching others. The assignment Roy had given them was multiplying. One person teaching one more. Geometric progression of understanding. Hallman called Roy to his office one afternoon. The council wants you to review applications for the next advanced program. We're bringing in species that have never successfully integrated into galactic society, more challenging than your first class. Roy reviewed the files. Crystalline beings who communicated through pain signals. Methane breathers whose biology required completely different environmental support. A species that genuinely viewed all other life as potential food, not metaphorically but as fundamental worldview. These students make Dravik hunters look easy, Roy observed. That's why we need you. You proved the impossible once. The council believes you can do it again. Roy thought about saying no. He'd succeeded with one group. Pushing his luck seemed foolish. These new species weren't just predators. They were fundamentally incompatible with standard galactic civilization. Then he thought about Rask forming pack alliances. Cluster 9 changing hive consciousness, Shade building bridges from darkness, Granite saving lives. If he'd walked away from his first students because they seemed impossible, none of that would have happened. When do they arrive? Roy asked. Next week. Roy spent that week reviewing everything he could find about the new species. The crystalline beings were called harmonic fragments. They didn't feel pain the way most species did. They felt harmony and discord. What others perceived as pain, they experienced as dissonance. Communication through controlled dissonance was their language. The methane breathers were drift clouds, gaseous beings that formed temporary cohesion through electromagnetic fields. They didn't have permanent form. Identity was fluid, literally. The entity that viewed other life as food was singular. A being called appetite. Its species name translated roughly to consumers of all. They'd been quarantined to their home system for 3,000 years because attempts at contact always ended in consumption. Roy read these files with growing concern mixed with strange excitement. If these beings could learn cooperation, it would prove something fundamental about the universe. That connection was possible across any divide. That understanding could bridge any gap. The first day arrived too quickly. Roy stood outside the new classroom. This one had more sophisticated containment, separate environmental zones, pain-proof barriers, emergency ejection systems. He opened the door. 3 students waited. The harmonic fragment looked like living glass, constantly shifting internal colors. The drift cloud occupied one corner, its gaseous form held together by visible electrical fields. Appetite was nightmare given shape, all-consuming mouths and digestive acids. They turned to regard him. Roy felt the familiar fear, the biological warning that he was in danger, predator instinct identifying prey. He walked to the middle of the room, set down his bag, sat cross-legged on the floor, and waited. The harmonic fragment vibrated, sending waves of dissonance through the room. Not attack, question, confusion. The drift cloud shifted colors, electromagnetic curiosity rippling through its form. Appetite's many mouths opened and closed in patterns that might have been communication. Roy took a breath. I know you're probably wondering why I'm not running, why I'm sitting here instead of establishing dominance or creating barriers. He looked at each of them in turn. I'm waiting to hear what you want to learn, what you want to understand about the galaxy beyond your home worlds. What questions keep you curious enough to try this instead of staying isolated? The harmonic fragment's vibrations changed, became less discordant, more curious. The drift cloud coalesced slightly, focusing attention. Appetite's mouth stilled. One spoke in gurgling standard galactic. Why aren't you afraid? Roy smiled honestly. I am afraid. I'm terrified. But I'm also curious about who you are beyond what you consume or how you communicate or what your biology demands. Fear and curiosity can exist together. So can being a predator and choosing cooperation. The silence that followed was different from his first class. More alien, more uncertain, but also holding possibility. My name is Roy Bennett, he continued. I'm human. I'm a predator species that learned cooperation. I'm here because I believe you can learn it too. Not by changing what you are, but by understanding why what you are matters to everyone else in the galaxy. The harmonic fragment vibrated a question. What if our nature makes us incompatible? Then we'll figure out how to build compatibility, Roy said. Together, one conversation at a time, one question at a time, one moment of understanding at a time. Appetite shifted forward slightly. Previous beings who tried to contact us became food. Why should you be different? Maybe I won't be, Roy admitted. But before you decide, I'd like to know what you're curious about. What do you wonder about species that don't consume everything they encounter? The question hung in the air. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Appetite's mouths formed something that might have been words. I wonder what it's like to exist alongside something without consuming it, to share space without ending it. Is that possible? I think so, Roy said. Want to explore that together? In his office, Hallman watched security monitors with 4 of his hands on 4 different controls, ready to evacuate Roy at the first sign of danger. But the first sign that came wasn't danger. It was conversation, question and answer, curiosity meeting openness. 3 impossible students and 1 human teacher beginning the slow work of building bridges across chasms that everyone said couldn't be crossed. Roy had taught monsters once. Now he was teaching beings beyond monster, beyond predator, beyond category. And he was doing it the same way he always did, by sitting down among them, by being honestly afraid, by asking what they wanted to learn, by believing that understanding was possible even when everything suggested it wasn't. The galaxy was changing, one student at a time, one conversation at a time, one human sitting among monsters, asking questions instead of running. And it was working.